There is a particular kind of historical story that, when you first run into it, sounds like a tall tale somebody made up at a pub. This is one of them. Except every part of it is true. One small wooden ship, no bigger than a Thames barge. One restless captain from a Devon village. One queen who looked away on purpose. And by the time they were done, the financial balance of Europe had quietly tilted. The Pacific had stopped being a Spanish lake, and nobody in Madrid could explain how. We are Arthur's living history, and using AI trained on Tudor portraits, ships' manifests, and the salt-bleached charts of a vanished maritime world, we are reopening the logbook on a voyage the Spanish never forgave. So, Plymouth Sound. The 13th of December, 1577, a low grey afternoon. The wind comes off the Atlantic with the smell of wet rope and pine pitch. 5 small vessels ride at anchor, hulls already streaked with salt. The flagship is called the Pelican, a stubby, square-sterned ship of around 120 tons, scarcely 100 feet from stem to stern, no bigger than a Thames sandbarge. Her decks are crammed with casks of salt beef, sacks of biscuit, gunpowder in waxed leather. The crew, 164 men and boys, stamp their feet on the cold cobbles, breath misting. A November storm has already shredded their masts once. The man pacing the quarterdeck is short, red-bearded, broad in the shoulders, with pale Devon eyes that have seen too much for 37 years. Francis Draque, son of a Protestant preacher from Tavistock. He has been ambushed by Spanish soldiers at San Juan de Ulua in Mexico, watched English shipmates lost in the confusion, and carried that grudge for 9 long years. He is not a gentleman. His enemies at court never let him forget that. Behind him on the deck stands a tall black man named Diego, Cimarron, escaped from Spanish captivity in the jungles of Panama and crossed paths with Draque during the Nombre de Dios raids of 1573. He speaks fluent Spanish and English, paid wages like the rest of the crew. He will become one of the most important and most quietly forgotten figures on this voyage. Hold him in your head. We come back to him. Right. A few weeks earlier, in a private chamber at Greenwich Palace, Elizabeth Tudor had leaned toward Draque across a candle and told him in that low, careful voice the ambassadors strained to hear, that she would gladly be revenged on the King of Spain for divers injuries she had received. She gave him a sword. She put 1,000 crowns into the venture from her own privy purse. And she made clear, with an emphasis no court clerk dared write down, that the King of Spain was on no account to learn of her involvement. What she has authorized in everything but name is state-sanctioned piracy on a hemispheric scale. The cover story is a trading voyage to Egypt, a fiction so transparent it is almost insulting. Drake's real orders sit in a locked chest in his cabin to be opened only at sea. And honestly, the sheer nerve of it still impresses me. A Queen of England signing off, with a wink, on a plan to plunder the most powerful empire on earth, and trusting it all to a sea captain from a Devon village. Reckless, beautiful statecraft. At Mogador, off the Moroccan coast, a sailor is lost in a beach raid by local horsemen while the men assemble a pinnace. The fleet sails on, shaken. Off Cape Verde in late January 1578, they take a Portuguese merchantman called the Santa Maria, and aboard her find a careful pilot from Porto named Nuno da Silva, who has charted the South Atlantic for 20 years. Draque renames the prize the Mary and presses da Silva into service. The pilot keeps a quiet journal that, decades later, will be read aloud in an Inquisition courtroom in Mexico, one of the most valuable records of the voyage to survive. By June 1578, the fleet reaches Port San Julian on the bleak Patagonian coast, the same desolate bay where Magellan, 58 years earlier, had quietly removed mutinous officers beneath a stand of dark trees. The bleached posts of his old scaffold are still standing on the shoreline when Draque arrives, grey wood split by half a century of Patagonian wind. This is where it gets dark. A gentleman named Thomas Doughty, well connected at court, charismatic, ambitious, has been undermining Draque among the men for months. 4 witnesses claim he has muttered more than once that he could make the company cut one another's throats. Draque finally has him bound to the mainmast, and on the 2nd of July, 1578, convenes a shipboard tribunal under the same Patagonian sky that watched Magellan's troubles. 40 men sit in judgment. Doughty is found guilty. He shares a final supper of bread and wine with Draque the night before. The 2 men kneel together, take communion, embrace and weep. Fletcher records it almost word for word. The next morning, on the open shore, the final stroke falls. Doughty is composed to the last. It is the moment Draque stops being one captain among equals and becomes the absolute master of the expedition. On the 20th of August, 1578, he renames the Pelican. He calls her the Golden Hind, after the female deer on the family crest of Sir Christopher Hatton, his principal patron and captain of the Queen's Guard. And here is a small thing I love. Just before entering the strait, an officer named John Winter learns from local people that they eat the bark of a certain bitter tree against scurvy. Centuries later, botanists will name the species Drimys winteri, winter's bark, after him. The fleet enters the Strait of Magellan. The passage is a knife between mountains. Cliffs rise dark on either side. Glaciers grind in the higher valleys. Snow falls in late summer. Draque pushes through in 16 days, faster than Magellan ever managed, and breaks out into the Pacific in early September. The ocean does not greet him kindly. A tempest hits within hours. The wind blows, by Fletcher's reckoning, for 52 days without pause. The Marigold is lost with all hands, including the carpenter who had stood as a juror against Doughty. The Elizabeth turns back through the strait and limps home. The Hind is driven far south to a latitude no European has ever logged, and in those storms, Draque makes a discovery he barely has time to write down. Tierra del Fuego is not the northern shore of a vast southern continent, as every European chart insists. It is an island. There is open water south of it, all the way to the ice. A Devon captain in a Pacific gale has quietly invalidated 50 years of Spanish geography. In November, he puts in at Mocha Island off the Chilean coast for fresh water. The Mapuche people there have suffered grievously from earlier Spanish raids and assume the Hind is another Spanish ship. They strike from the dunes. Draque himself takes an arrow near his right eye and escapes only because his men drag him bodily back into the longboat. And Diego, remember Diego, is struck the same morning. He will live another 10 months before the injury carries him quietly from this world in the warm waters off the Moluccas. Draque never replaces him. And here is where, frankly, any sane captain would have turned for home. 2 years at sea. An arrow scar near the eye, half the fleet gone. Every reasonable instinct says go. Draque does not. He decides, in that battered ship, to start shopping. The Spanish colonies along the Pacific have never once been raided from the sea. They keep no warships in their harbors. Silver from Potosi, gold from New Granada, silk and porcelain from Manila, all of it passes along this coast in slow, unarmed merchantmen, between sleepy ports with nothing more than a customs official and a chapel bell. Draque glides up the coast like a wolf through an unguarded kitchen. Valparaiso, December 1578. He sails calmly into the harbour. The Spanish ship at anchor inside mistakes the Hind for a friendly vessel and raises a welcoming drum. Drake's men row across, climb aboard, and take her without losing a soul. Wine, gold, Andean wool, and a Greek pilot named Juan Griego who knows the coast all the way to Lima. Arica, Callao, Paita, each port slower, sleepier, more astonished than the last. In Callao, on the 13th of February 1579, he enters the harbour at night, drops anchor among 30 Spanish ships and cuts their cables in the dark, so they drift uselessly out to sea while he searches for cargo. The Viceroy of Peru writes a frantic letter to Madrid the next morning. The letter takes 9 months to arrive. In Callao, he hears the most important rumour of his life. A treasure ship has sailed northward, 12 days ahead of him, carrying the year's silver from Lima up to Panama. Her formal name is Nuestra Señora de la Concepción. Her own crew, in the casual habit of the Pacific, call her by a far ruder nickname, Cacafuego, which the word fire shitter only approximately captures. Draque makes a dry note of it and turns north. He offers a heavy gold chain, lifted from a previous prize, to the first man to sight her from the masthead. The chain is eventually claimed by his own young nephew, John Draque, who spots her at last off Cape San Francisco in Ecuador on the 1st of March, 1579. The midday sun is high. To approach in daylight without alarming his quarry, Draque plays one of the great tricks of Tudor seafaring, sails fully spread, but heavy wine casks filled with seawater secretly dragged behind the stern as a brake. The Galleon glances astern and sees a clumsy merchant in a fair wind. At dusk, Draque cuts the casks loose. The Hind leaps forward like a hound off the lead. A single broadside takes the Cacafuego's mizzenmast clean off. Drake's men board her. The Concepcion's captain is San Juan de Anton, a Basque sailor with a careful conscience. He surrenders quickly. Draque greets him with an embrace and the words, by tradition, "Have patience." Such is the custom of war. Then he invites him aboard the Hind for supper. Silver plate is laid out, wine is poured. The English captain is courteous, charming, curious, asking about news from Madrid, about the viceroyalty, about the king's health. San Juan de Anton later writes that he could not square the gentleman across the table with the man who had just lifted his entire cargo. And the cargo? Look at the cargo. 26 tons of silver, 80 pounds of gold, 13 chests of pieces of 8, a golden crucifix studded with emeralds, crates of pearls. It takes 6 full days in shifts on a secluded Ecuadorian shore to move it all across. The Hind sinks a full hand deeper in the water by the time they are done. The total value, by recent scholarship, runs on the order of £480 million in present-day money. For a country whose annual government income was scarcely £200,000, this was a national budget at sea. I still find that astonishing. One small ship, one captain's bluff, and the fiscal arithmetic of 2 nations shifts overnight. Draque hands San Juan de Anton a letter of safe conduct, gives him a German firelock and a silver cup, and lets him sail away unharmed. He has plenty of treasure. He does not need a fight. He needs a way home. At Guatulco in April, he quietly releases Nuño da Silva with instructions to spread the false story that Draque means to return by way of the rumoured Northwest Passage. Da Silva is later interrogated by the Inquisition. He gives them, faithfully, exactly the misinformation Draque wanted them to hear. The Hind sails far up the Pacific coast of North America. Around present-day Oregon, the rigging stiffens with frost in June. Draque decides the Northwest Passage, if it exists at all, is not navigable by his single vessel. He turns south. In late June 1579, the Hind drops anchor in a bay on the coast of what we now call California, most likely Drake's Bay, north of San Francisco. The crew goes ashore. They are met by the coast Miwok, who arrive with feather banners, tobacco, and long ceremonial speeches that go on for 3 days. Fletcher records the encounter carefully. Drake erects a brass plate, nails it to a post, claims the land for Queen Elizabeth, and calls it Nova Albion. The original plate, if it ever existed, has never been definitively found. A celebrated one was produced in California in 1936 and accepted as genuine for 40 years before being exposed as a clever hoax. You can stand on a California cliff today, smell the same cold salt fog roll in off that ocean, and know that a small Devon ship once careened on the beach below. He turns west. He crosses the entire Pacific in a single open ocean sweep with no European chart. 68 days without sighting land, the men eating ship rats by the end. They make landfall in the Philippines, then the Moluccas. There Drake befriends the Sultan of Ternate, signs a trade agreement, England's first formal treaty with an Asian sovereign, and loads 6 tons of cloves into his already groaning hold. Cloves at that time are worth pound for pound, almost the value of gold. The Hind nearly ends her voyage on a reef near Sulawesi in January 1580. She runs hard onto coral in the night. Drake throws cannon overboard, throws cloves overboard, prays openly on the deck. Fletcher, in a sermon that evening, suggests aloud that the misfortunes are linked to the unjust handling of Doughty. Drake, furious, chains the clergyman to a hatch cover and excommunicates him on the spot. The wind shifts, the Hind slips free. She rounds the Cape of Good Hope in the summer of 1580, her timbers eaten through with worm. On the 26th of September, 1580, the Golden Hind sails into Plymouth Sound. The very first words Drake calls up to a fisherman in the harbour are, "Is the Queen still alive?" He has been gone almost 3 years. He has lost 4 of his 5 ships. He has brought home 59 of the 164 men who set out with him. The treasure is unloaded by night at nearby Tremerton Castle, under the watchful eye of the Queen's own guards. Elizabeth keeps him waiting 6 months while she calculates the diplomatic storm. The Spanish ambassador demands the treasure returned and Drake handed over for punishment. She refuses. On the 4th of April, 1581, she boards the Golden Hind herself at Deptford on the Thames in a low spring light. The gangway buckles under the weight of her court. Roughly 100 onlookers tumble into the Thames mud, miraculously all unharmed. Her own garter slips off in the chaos. The French ambassador retrieves it, and she tells him he may keep it as a memento. She wears cloth of gold. And here is the moment I love. She tells Drake, in a deliberately loud voice the Spanish ambassador can overhear, that the King of Spain has asked for his head, and that she has brought a gilded sword that could strike it off if she chose. Then she hands the sword to Monsieur de Marchaumont, a French diplomat standing beside her, and asks him to perform the knighting in her name. She is using a Frenchman's hand to insult the Spaniard and to hint at a new Anglo-French alignment that will keep Madrid awake for months. One of the most calculated political theatres of the 16th century pulled off with a smile. The investors receive a return of roughly 4,700%. £47 for every pound put in. The Queen's half share alone exceeds the rest of the Crown's annual income. She uses much of it to pay off the entire foreign debt of England, with £40,000 left over to seed a new Levant trading company. She declares Drake's journals and charts state secrets. They will eventually be lost in the Whitehall Palace fire of 1698. Drake himself buys Buckland Abbey in Devon, a former Cistercian monastery, and walks its cloisters in silk, where monks once walked in wool. Within the year, he is elected Mayor of Plymouth and arranges a fresh water supply that will run for 3 centuries. And the Hind herself? Moored at Deptford as the world's first museum ship, where Tudor Londoners queue and pay to walk her decks. By the mid-1600s, she has rotted to almost nothing. Out of her last sound timbers, in 1668, a storekeeper named John Davies carves a single oak chair and presents it to the Bodleian Library at Oxford. It still stands in the Divinity School today, with verses by Abraham Cowley pinned to its back. A second piece of her wood became a long table, the cupboard, in Middle Temple Hall, where new barristers still sign the roll on her timbers before being called to the bar. Her ship's lantern hung for centuries in the same hall until it was lost in the Blitz of 1940. The Spanish Empire never quite steadies after this voyage. The myth of an inviolable Pacific is broken. 7 years on, when the Spanish Armada sails toward England to settle the account, the commanders in Madrid speak Drake's name with something close to dread. They call him El Draque, the dragon. We are Arthur's living history, and stories like this one, the kind that quietly reshape a century, are why we keep the lamps burning late. Tell us in the comments which moment held your breath, which forgotten captain or queen you would like us to chase down next. Subscribe if you want to ride more of these tides with us, because what we are building from here will be larger, sharper, and stranger than anything we have launched so far. History, like the sea, does not always give up its secrets gently. Sometimes it surrenders them in silver. And we, like Drake on a Pacific dusk, keep our sails set and our lanterns trimmed.